Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Ian Hayes. I'm the Accounts and Administration Manager here at Training Bitesize, and I'm joined today by our APM trainer, Callum Downing. We're here today to talk about the APM PMQ course and basically the changes from BOK6 to BOK7. I can see we've got a diverse audience with us today. We've got some learners who are currently studying with us. We've got learners who are studying with us, or self-studying, or with other providers. And I know we've got a couple of people on who are just interested in subjects. So it should lead to some great questions in the Q&A sessions a bit later on in the webinar. We are recording this webinar today, so you can refer back to it following the completion of it, and we'll send these details out to you when we finish the webinar today. Bitesize, we are a family-run business and we take pride in supporting our learners through their learning journey. We offer a wide range of project management and IT service management courses. We try to provide the best possible experiences and the best ways for each of our learners to study these courses. So let me now introduce Callum to you. Callum, he specialises in APM training, and he has many years' experience as both a project management manager and a trainer here with us at Training Bitesize. And he'll go through all the details and the changes of the BOK7 PMQ course with you now. So Callum, over to you.
So this is one of the significant changes is the command verbs. The Body of Knowledge 6 had different command verbs in their question. Now, command verbs are indicators, or they're telling you what kind of question they want, or what kind of answer they expect from you. So there are a few more than there used to be. A few of them are quite similar, but there are some key differences. So the first one is differentiate. Recognize or determine what makes something different. So this is asking you to compare two things. Say, for example, something like there's a topic in the syllabus called investment appraisal. There's a couple of investment appraisal techniques, payback and net present value. They're very different to each other. They are part of the same topic, but they're very different. So a question might be differentiate between payback method and net present value method of investment appraisal. So it might be something along those lines. Determine what makes something different. Describe what makes them different. In fact, what I often see in this, what I've seen in the sample paper is something like explain the differences between. It may be phrased like that as well, but it's asking you to compare two things. What makes them different? Why are they distinct from each other? Then we have describe. So give an account including all the relevant characteristics, qualities, and events. So this is going to be, what is it? What is it? What is it? What is this thing? What are its characteristics? What about it makes it distinct? What about it gives it that definition? Why is it called that? That kind of thing. So what is this tool or something like that? What is this? Explain is the most common type of question I would say you would encounter. Explain is give an account of the purpose or reason. So this is asking for knowledge here. This is asking for an understanding of what it's asking you. It's asking for a detailed understanding. So these questions tend to be weighted the heaviest typically. If I was to give a weighting to a question, you tend to find explain are the ones with the highest weightings. So they're asking for detail. I'll go into more detail on some of these in a minute. Okay, there's a following slide where it starts suggesting how you can approach answering these types of questions. Then we have interpret. So interpret is it will provide you some data, and then you need to use or look at that data, translate it to show an understanding of that data, to demonstrate understanding of how you use it, how you perhaps use it to make a decision or inform a future action. Outline, set out the main points characteristics. So outline is it will typically be worth, so it might be part A, outline 4 things, outline 4 characteristics of something. It won't require lots of detail because each of those, if you imagine outline 4 things, there'll be 5 marks each, totaling part A is 20 marks total. So it's asking for bullet points almost, like nice, tidy, maybe a few, like 3 or 4 sentences tops around what it is. Okay. Then the last one, state, express the details without elaboration. So this is very much the fine points without explaining. So imagine explain is going to be thinking about the why we might use something. State is going to be just, what is it without any other details? No, where would we use it or who would use it? Just what is it? Just very, very clear cut. Again, state will only ever be worth 5 marks. So for example, part A, state 4 sources of conflict in a project. And it will ask you then to state that each of those 4 sources of conflict would be worth 5 marks, totaling up to part A's 20. Okay. So the assessment criteria then, each of the 16 questions are based on one of 11 learning outcomes in the syllabus. Okay, so you might actually see at the top of each question, you might have a learning outcome written before it. So despite the fact that the APM have 16 questions, there are only 11 learning outcomes in the syllabus. So they will be multiple topics as part of those 11 outcomes. There are 67 assessment criteria. Parts A and Part B each deal with one of those assessment criteria. So there's a lot they can choose from here. There's a lot. So one thing I will say is I know that the sample paper which you have access to is a sample paper. They're not necessarily real questions. So there's a huge bank of questions they can ask based on those 67 assessment criteria. So in total, 32 assessment criteria questions in each exam paper. You must answer 20 of them, 10 questions, parts each. The majority of assessment criteria use the explain command verb. That is their preference because they do want to show, this is a knowledge exam. They want you to show knowledge. They want you to show an understanding and how things are used, why things are used, things like that. And that's why they tend to favor explain. Some of the assessment criteria use the differentiate command verb. Some use the describe command verb. A few. So those explain is the most common. Differentiate maybe is probably the second most typical. Describe tends to be in there a few times as well, but the least common are outlines and states. You don't often find outline and states. There's only a few in the paper typically, because they don't tend to ask for a lot of detail. They're asking for high level, just almost, as I said, bullet points of 3 or 4 sentences. There's only one going to be using the interpret command verb, which is earned value management. I nearly used an acronym there, sorry. So earned value management is the only one that will ask you to interpret data. There are no calculations required in the exam paper. It's just, it will provide you data. You then need to look at that data and then interpret it, work out what it's telling you. What does it mean? Okay. So there will be an understanding of including versus such as in the assessment criteria. So some of the questions will sort of suggest you what you need to include. Some of them will give you a suggestion. So what you might find is they'll provide a list such as, and then they might provide a list which you need to explain. You have to choose from some of the words in there and you have to explain them. The assessment criteria can be used as a revision checklist as well. That can be a nice way to go through your revision and check things off to make sure you're happy with it. So there's 67, there are 32, they'll be asked in the exam and you have to answer 20 of them. So you can use it as a nice checklist to sort of structure your revision perhaps. So the hints and tips, and these haven't really changed between body of knowledge 6 and 7, if I'm being honest. So make sure you do 10 questions, try your best to do 10. You can do, now the biggest piece of advice in the exam, there's 2 main pieces of advice I'd give you in the exam based on my experiences with people sitting them, is make sure you do only spend 15 minutes per time. The biggest reason why people fail the exam based on what I've seen is time management, is that you only have 3 hours, and believe me, those 3 hours will flick by very, very quickly. If you're under pressure, you're in a stressful environment, it's going to be a very fast 3 hours. So to time yourself, just make sure you keep an eye on the clock. Make sure you're not necessarily ruthless, but be quite cutthroat with yourself. Say, I've spent 15 minutes on this question, I need to move on to something else now. What will happen if you spend, I'll just spend another 5 minutes on this question. 20 minutes per question, you will run out of time. You will lose your 3 hours. So 15 minutes per question is really, really important to helping structure your exam. And the other biggest piece of advice is start with your best questions. This is why that 15 minutes at the start is so useful. Because if you spend that time reading through the questions, you can prioritize which questions you want to do first. So I would suggest going through your exam, ticking off or making a note of any questions you think, I'm happy with that question. That's a good question. I think I could get a 80 to 90% on that question without really struggling. So do that one first. Don't feel you have to answer them in order. There's no need to. Answer them in whatever order you feel is appropriate. So tick off the questions you're happiest with. If you have 4 or 5 of those, you're almost past the exam as it is. Then go through the questions you're okay with, but not you're not so happy with. Perhaps they're worded in a strange way. You know what they're asking, but you're not sure if you really could get that 80%, 90%. You might get 60 or 70% perhaps. So go through those ones next. And then as a last ditch, any questions you think, I really am not sure about this one. If you need to get to 10 questions, write something. You're better off writing something than nothing, even if it's just a few lines, because the examiners will not dock marks from you. They will not take marks away. It's always a positive marking scheme. So anything you write, if it's correct and it's appropriate to the question, will be assessed positively. So it can get you marked. It's always worth doing. Something that's worth noting, based on an experience I had with a candidate in September, is if you are doing the online exam and you decide, I'm not happy with an answer, I'll go on to a different question, and you end up accidentally answering 11, make sure you delete anything you've written for a question you're not happy with. And if you don't, they'll treat it as you answered too many questions and they'll bin off one of your answers. Okay, so do make sure if you write something and you're not happy with it and you do not want it to be marked, make sure you delete it. Okay, it's very important you do that. Otherwise, you'll end up messing around with your questions. Okay. The determined question there should be an interpret question. It will typically be question 16 if they include the interpret question. They don't always. The sample paper, for example, does not have an interpret question in it. Okay. So 15 minutes per question, 10 marks per 3 minutes. So there's quite a lot of writing, there's quite a lot of typing. Again, and the other thing to keep in mind is you don't have to write War and Peace. It's 55% to pass, not 100%. If you get 60%, 70% for each question, that's a passed exam. Okay, so again, that's why I suggest be slightly cutthroat with yourself when you're answering these questions. So if I've reached 15 minutes, it's time to move on. Don't tidy it up. Time to move on. That's why you have the 15 minutes at the end to go back and go, the final couple of words just to finish off a question. That way, it will keep you nice and organized. It will reduce the stress. It will make things, more relaxed. It's not going to be relaxed. I'm not going to lie to you and say it's going to be a relaxing 3 hours, but it will help to keep you at ease. Okay. Now, I won't use the acronym I sometimes have used in courses because it's not technically that appropriate, but read the full question. Okay, you might be able to interpret what the acronym may sometimes stand for, but read the full question. Don't assume it's the same question as you may have seen while practicing, because the questions in the sample paper are not live questions. Okay, so they have new questions. So do make sure you spend that time reading through it. Missing a few things in a question will be a problem. So if you answer one question if you have one question that says something and you misread it and answer the second question with the answer for part A, then that's not going to get you any marks. Make sure you include the obvious things. Make sure you include the key points. The elaboration is the bit that gives you the weight, the extra marks, the bulk of your marks. But if you include the obvious points, especially if you're short on time, if you feel you're running out of time, get the obvious points down, get the key points. The examiner can only see what you've written. They can't understand. They don't know what you're thinking. So if you think something and you jot it down somewhere on a piece of scrap paper and you don't ever write it in your exam, they're never going to see that. Okay, so do make sure if you have an idea, you have something you want to say, capture it. If a question's asking for benefits, make sure you give benefits. Now, this is one of the a failing I've seen a few times, a problem I've seen a few times. People answer the question by describing what the thing is and not talking about what the benefit of it is. If a question's saying what are the benefits of earned value management, you won't need to say earned value management is a tool that looks at schedule and payments. You won't need to say that. It's saying what benefit does having earned value management as a tool on our project give us? Helps us to identify risk, helps us to understand, make informed decisions, help us to manage stakeholder expectations. So you don't need to go into the elaboration of what it is. You just need to talk about what is good about it and why would we use it on our projects. Something that's very helpful for your revision is to use that sample paper that's provided, or the APM provide and Bitesize provides, as a mock exam. I would be hesitant to say go and set yourself 3 hours and have a go at it. I would say that's going to be quite full on. But I certainly think having a go at a few questions, especially in the run up to your exam, when you're going to sit it, have a go at a few questions each evening. I would say you can have a go at the full 3 hours if you like, but I have met people in the past where it's put them off a little bit, and I think that's you save your energy, save your strength for the full exam. Okay, but certainly use the sample paper as a mock exam. Have a go at a few questions each evening. Maybe spend half an hour to 45 minutes, maybe doing 2 or 3 questions in an evening in the run up to the exam, because that can get you in the right mindset. And obviously make sure you're comfortable and you're happy to type, because typing, again, bearing in mind it's going to be 3 hours of solid typing. Make sure you're prepared for that. And again, if you're doing a few questions each evening, that's going to warm you up a little bit. Again, I think if you do 3 hours at once as a sample mock exam, that can, overspend perhaps. So get prepared, but don't go all in doing your revision. Maybe do a few questions each evening in the run up to your exam. So here's some suggestions on how to expand on answers. And I think the how, who, what, when, where, why is incredibly useful, especially for an explain question. Use examples. I think examples are dead useful actually, because they show you can contextualize it. They show that not only you understand the theory, you understand how it would be applied in practice in reality. And I would always suggest using simple examples. I wouldn't suggest if you work with. So I used to work for the Ministry of Defence. So, when I taught this to the MOD, they would often say, "Oh, can I use a ship I was working on as a project?" And I go, "Yes, but you don't want to spend more time explaining what the project is than answering the question." So keep your examples simple. I mean, I often use things like patios and sheds. I play guitar, so I talk about guitars a lot on my courses. So it's something simple that the examiner can understand and relate to without having to research it. Okay. It also means you're not spending ages typing about it. So use those examples to contextualize and show understanding of your answers. The why is so useful. So what I tend to say, especially with an explain question, is to talk the Kipling's questions, the what, the how, the when, the who. If I was to say, for example, if the question's how we use something, I'd say, okay, so how is it used? And then why do we use it that way? Okay, so what is used? And why do we use that? So who uses it? Oh, so why do they use it? So it's each time you answer one of those Kipling's questions is to then follow it up with why. Okay, so when is it used? So why is it used then? Who uses it? Why do they use it? That then expands an answer. It really adds depth to an answer, especially for those explain questions and differentiates and describes. It really adds that depth that can really bolster your marks, bring your marks up to close to 100% that you really want. Those DAISY diagrams. Now, you're not allowed to bring any notes into the exam. You're not allowed to bring any, it's a closed book exam. So you're not allowed to bring anything into the exam prior. However, what I do suggest is to have a stack of blank paper, lined paper or blank paper that you can make notes on, to just scribble ideas down. You can't put diagrams into the exam. It's an essay. You can't have, they won't mark any diagrams you doodle up in if you manage to work out how to doodle on the answer sheet. They won't mark any diagrams. However, diagrams can be a very useful way to jog memory, help to expand answers. The DAISY diagram is one of them. You put your central thing in the middle, then you add things around the edge that are related to it. There's something in the project management world called the project triangle. Everything can relate back to the project triangle in some way. That can be a useful way of memorizing or helping to jog your memory with some of these answers. This other bit, this last bit, considering the question from a different perspective. Now, this is something else I suggest or have suggested in the past is if you talk about especially benefits, if you talk about benefits or advantages so the question might be explain some advantages to using ESCO and value management again. Okay, advantages is quite a broad question. If you tweak that question slightly and say, well, who is the advantage to? So an advantage of earned value management to the project manager. Suddenly that narrows down what you're answering again. It pins it down a little bit more. So that can be a very good way of approaching it. Also is where in the project might we be that this gets used? So the phase we're currently in, why would we use it in this phase? Why would we perhaps use it in this phase? Why would we not use it in this phase? And that can be another way of approaching a question is if a question is talking about an advantage, you could perhaps just tweak it at the end and say a disadvantage or a consideration would be this to show you understand the other side of the coin. That can be a very useful way of getting some extra marks to show you understand not only that side of a topic, but you understand the other side of that, considerations that come alongside it as well. Cool. So I'm going to hand over to Ian to take a question and answer session. So Ian, do you want to just handle this for a moment?
Thanks, Callum. So I hope everybody sort of found the sort of the exam overview helpful. At this stage, I'd just like to open up to the floor, really, and if anybody has any questions regarding the actual exam or the format of the exam itself, me or Callum will be more than happy to answer them for you.
One from me, please, guys. So I failed my my exam last year, and before last year. So it's 2019, and I've kind of put it to the back of my mind, but need to do it as part of work. Next escalation up. So back then it was sit the exam long in Bristol. Came home with my brain going round and round on the train. But can you just explain what life is like now with the pandemic on, and what the exams like?
But the main difference really is that they're not really, the APM are not offering any paper exams, and obviously there's no face-to-face training going on at the moment. That's the main difference in the world that we're in at the moment. So you would have to, if with for example, where I've got a course in a few weeks' time where I'm going to be teaching MOD personnel, and their computers don't have access to, they don't have the facility to have webcams or the connection to the APM's sort of app that lets you do the exam. So you'd need to make sure you have a computer that has access to a webcam. You'd have to have a phone that has a webcam enabled on it and things like that, as well as a computer that can connect to their application online. So that's the APM will send you everything you need before that to test everything else. But I would always make sure you've tested everything, tested your computer beforehand, make sure it's not going to have any trouble on the day. In fact, me and Ian were talking about this before the call started. There's an extra level of stress you really don't need. So that's the main difference. Make sure your system's going to work. Now, the other is obviously virtual training. So Zoom is generally how we do our training. And I always try and approach virtual training how I would approach a face-to-face. So I try to avoid lecturing. I don't particularly enjoy lecturing for 5 days particularly. And I don't think many people enjoy being lectured at for 5 days. It can be a bit overwhelming. So I tend to have webcam. I'll always have my webcam enabled on a virtual course. I'll always try and run it with exercises and interactions. I have anecdotes and things like that I like to try and use to at least get close to that face-to-face interaction. It does mean we can share things a lot easier in a virtual environment as well. So if you have a go at a question, say for example, when I run the 5-day PMQ courses, one of the pieces of homework I'll set is to say, I want you to answer a couple of these questions. Have half an hour on a couple of questions. So what I've usually done in the morning of the following day is, hello, yes.
Can I ask a question? How long would you recommend studying for up until the exam?
That's an open-ended question. As much as you feel is necessary, I guess. I mean, I think, well, as I said, with the PMQ, I always suggest half an hour minimum per evening. So that's a minimum. So you want to spend have a go at least one question. I always set at least one, and I'll say pick another one. And then also review what you've done that day, because typically on a 5-day PMQ, Monday to Thursday you're doing the course, then the Friday is kind of like a catch up, and then you sit the exam in the afternoon. That's generally how it runs. But we do send out pre-reading, which is a few hours worth of pre-reading in theory. So it's a book you can have a read through, or PDF effectively you can have a read through. But revision is really, some people don't do any revision and they pass. I know, for example, some people have lots of revision. They need lots of revision to be able to pass. And I always suggest half an hour to an hour every evening of revision and exam prep questions like that on the 5-day course, a minimum really, and at least 2 questions per day. But that's a suggestion. Sometimes people just don't have the time because there's work going on, there's meetings being arranged and all this kind of stuff. I had one poor guy on a course a few months ago who was basically being hounded by his business at 6 in the morning right through to 8 in the evening, and he was blitzing through his questions at 8 o'clock at night. And it's just you need to allow that time. I would always suggest you arrange, if you're on a course, arranging with your business that they leave you alone.
Yeah.
Because I think that valuable time is important.
For me, I don't think 1 week of studying would be enough.
No, I would agree.
I would like to do at least a month of it so that it sinks into my head, because I'm quite new to project management.
Well, as I said, Bitesize always sends out a pre-reading. They don't send everything out to you because it'd be overwhelming, but we always send out a pre-reading book, a sort of fairly succinct book, or again, it'd be a book I imagine nowadays, but a PDF that you can have a read through that goes through the main points. and that is going to be before, when you book your course, it will be prior to the course. You have an opportunity to read through those stuff. Ian, I'm not sure how soon it tends to be before the course. Do you mind answering that one for me?
Sure. So with the classroom-based courses, we would send the pre-course reading out approximately about 4 weeks before the course, and that pre-course reading consists of about 10 hours of, well, on average, it takes about 10 hours worth of studying to go through. So it's quite so we give you that, a full month to go through it, and it's, there is quite a bit in there to actually get you sort of up and running and prepare you for the classroom course. If you were going to look at alternative ways of studying, if you're looking at online studying as opposed to a classroom based one, you're looking at on average 30 to 40 hours to complete the online course. And that probably doesn't include taking extra time to do questions and mock example questions as well. So it's there is quite a lot of learning in there, but you obviously as long as you make sure you give yourself enough time to do it, you should be absolutely fine to go on and complete the qualification.
Hi, Callum. Can I ask something? It's Alex here. Your volume keeps on going down every now and then, as if you're moving away from the microphone. Ian's is steady.
Right.
Yours has dips every now and then.
Yes, I'd agree with that, actually. The sound
is it really?
In a slightly strange way for me too.
And
it shouldn't be. My microphone's by my face.
You
might be a connection issue.
Concentrating on what you're saying.
Right, 2 seconds. Hang on one moment. Let's see if I can fix it. Bear with me. Right.
I have another question if there's still time.
Yeah, I think there's time, yeah.
Okay, great. I'm taking the PMQ distance learning online, so I basically have a year in which to do it, which is proving, well, it's certainly the right decision for me in terms of work and just circumstances and stuff. I was just wondering, obviously, with it being BOK7 now, would you say it is still worthwhile looking at past BOK6 like questions and resources in that sense? I'm assuming there's less available for in terms of, like test questions and stuff, because this new syllabus is new, or are those now redundant?
So first off, can you hear me? Is that better? I've just tweaked my microphone a little bit.
No, I can hear you.
Good. Okay. Sorry about that, everyone. I didn't realise. I must have had the microphone set to something else. So apologies. Yeah, good question. I would avoid BOK6 stuff really, simply because it doesn't really. There's Body of Knowledge 7 hasn't taken anything away from BOK6. It's added to BOK6, but the question types are very different. They're asking for very different stuff now. There are a lot of materials because BOK6 has been around for a few years. There's actually a lot of material available for Body of Knowledge 6 available. If you were to go on Amazon, for example, there's loads of books about how to study BOK6. But I would not go near them because they're just. My worry would be you'll get familiar with BOK6 terminology and approaches and it would mean you have to almost unlearn it to be able to do Body of Knowledge 7. So I'd try and stick with Body of Knowledge 7 stuff moving forward, because it means you're not going to confuse matters and things like that. There are slowly becoming, actually, Body of Knowledge 6 was actually, Body of Knowledge 7 was switched on last year. So it's actually been available for about 6 months now, probably over 6 months. So there are materials being written, there are books becoming available, but it is just slowly catching up.
Sorry, just to say, your microphone is actually still doing that weird thing, so you're kind of dropping in and out slightly.
Oh dear.
To be honest, I don't know that there's anything you can do about it, so let's just.
Yeah, I'll just try one last thing, and then if it doesn't work, I'll have to sort of make do. Is that any better? Is that change?
I mean, it's fine at the moment, so.
It was, yeah, okay.
It's kind of...
So apologies, everybody, if it is doing that. I don't know why it would. Yeah, so yeah, I would avoid BOK6 stuff. In a short answer, I'd only look at BOK7 stuff. Yeah.
Okay, fine. But there are, if I was to want a wider range, I guess, of practice questions and things like that before the exam, there are things that you can buy online or whatever.
But Bitesize has a lot of stuff available online.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what there's loads of material on there to look at. But again, there's I don't think he's written it. There was a guy, there's a book called the PMQ Primer, which I used to like, by, I think his name was Robin Kay. I don't think he's written a body of knowledge 7.1 as of yet. But that if you're doing it over a year, it may be that comes out. And I always liked that book because it was someone else's perspective on the syllabus, without sort of dictating it to you about how to do things. It's just really nice, compressed syllabus, which I really liked. I used to keep it in my bag with me when I was teaching Body of Knowledge 6, because it was just someone else's angle on things, and I just helped to explain things. So if that comes out, it's by a guy called Robin Kay. It's called the PMQ Primer, and I'm sure he'll probably do another one for Body of Knowledge 7. So
okay, thank you. That's
okay.
great.
I have a question about the exams itself. Can I just take that on?
Yeah,
because it's online right now. What exactly is the mode? Is it that we're going to write handwritten and then upload, or we're going to type?
It's a typed exam, yeah. So you type directly into it, yeah. So effectively, how it'll work is you open up a landing page kind of thing on a website. Right. Google Chrome is the one that is recommended typically. Yeah. You open up a website and it takes you to this. It basically starts interacting with you. You can start typing things in. Then there'll be a space on page to type your answer in for each questions. But it will be a typed exam, yes.
Okay. Does it limit you on how you would move from question to question, or is that entirely within your control?
That's entirely within your control, yeah. So you can, if you want to go to question, I mean, if you look through it and you decide question 16 is the question you want to go through first, you click question 16 and do that one first.
Right.
Now,
do they give extra time because of the complexities of using PC directly?
No, unless there's a medical reason why you would need extra time. That's generally the reason why they award extra time. So, for example, a colleague of mine was dyslexic. She was awarded, when she sat the exam, she was awarded 45 minutes extra. So it's, as long as you can, it's a medical reason, then you have to justify it with a proof from a doctor.
Right.
They've not awarded extra time for laptop use, I'm afraid, no.
Just to jump in there, so again, when I did mine back in 2019, I'm dyslexic as well, so I had an extra 45 minutes. I think for me, doing it on the computer is going to be a lot easier than doing it on paper. It's incredibly stressful.
I think that's generally the feedback we've had. I think me and Ian were talking about this just before this all started. We were saying, well, what does the future look like? And I think it's going to end up being, when things ease up a little bit, I think APM will offer a choice. So if you want to sit an online exam, they will be able to do that. They have the infrastructure to be able to support online exams now, but also I think they'll be able to offer paper exams. So I think that's what the future will look like. You will be able to choose what type of exam you pick. I don't know, that's speculation on my part, to be honest with you. I imagine that's what they'll end up doing. They may end up just embracing virtual and go that way. But
it's Alex here. I was on the review and focus groups for the previous body of knowledge, and they promised us in 2010 that the online exams were imminent. And there was a lot of toing and froing about whether or not they would get rid of written exams.
Yeah,
so the APM moves and what apparently its core objectives. I'd take it all with a pinch of salt.
Yes, I think so. The APM. Again, I don't work for the APM. I don't know what they're planning. So I know what they've told me they're thinking of doing, but I don't know explicitly what they are planning. I'm hoping that they will go to a blended future, but again, it's difficult to say at the moment. So
believe it when you see it.
This is a question for Ian, please. The BOK7 pre-reading that you do send out to people who come to the face-to-face lectures, what is the equivalent of that in the distance online mode?
So the pre-course reading is just made up of sort of the content of the course, just at a more, well, sort of a basic level, really. So to give you that basic understanding, so you're going into the course, so you have a basic understanding of project management and the course itself. So when you attend the course, you can then go on and go straight into the more detail of the syllabus itself, rather than starting from the very basics.
Okay, but on the online, what do you do if you have no pre-reading? Is there something equivalent given?
No, so it's all contained within the pre-reading. So in the online course, so you'll start
Right.
from the sort of the basics to give you the introduction side of it, and then it'll go into in more detail. So it's all encased within the online course.
Right. Thank you.
Fantastic. So, Callum, I'm just conscious of sort of time. So, if anyone else has got any questions, we'll give you at the end of it. We'll have some contact details for ourselves, so we can. If you've got any further questions following this regarding the exam, you can pop them in. Drop them into us on the email address we'll provide. But do you want to move on to the actual content of BOK7?
Yeah, of course. So we'll go through some of the changes quickly. Okay, I'm not going to spend ages on this because this is what we have the 5-day courses for, but or the courses for, not just the 5-day. But let's go through some of this stuff. So there is the 22 topics. They are the same headings as Body of Knowledge 6, but they have been updated or extended. So some of the terminology has changed, and there have been additions too. So the main, off the top of my head, the main one that's changed is life cycles. That's the main one that has seen significant change. So hence life cycles, here we go, I preempted that. So the standard life cycle has become known as the linear life cycle, and they've changed some of the phase names. So it used to be concept, definition, development, and handover and close, but they've now changed it to, for the development phase is now deployment, handover and close is now transition, and they've introduced a new phase called adoption. Okay, so they have introduced a new phase and they've changed the name of a couple of them. We've also, or they have also introduced iterative and hybrid life cycles. They're alternative life cycles. What they look like, I'll go through in a moment, okay? But they're 2 new life cycles that the APM has adopted into their syllabus. Roles and responsibilities has had something called Project Management Office added in, which replaces project administration. And there are 3 types of PMO, so central, embedded, or hub and spoke. So hub and spoke is one of the 3, okay? Project board names expand to include the term governance board, and product owner, which is an agile term from agile project management, has been added in as well to discuss how someone owns a product as part of an iterative life cycle. So new terms around environments have been added. So we have VUCA, so volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity to reflect an unstable environment. I can't think of any unstable environments that are happening right now at all, though, that might have VUCA being sort of applied to by some organizations, but you take from that what you will. Then we have BATNA and ZOPA added to negotiation. So BATNA is an acronym that means Best Alternative to Negotiated Agreement. So that is what I would call, if I was being in my simple mind, walk away point. So best alternative to negotiated agreement is where do we walk away from this negotiation? The ZOPA is zone of possible agreement or potential agreement, or whichever you fancy. Zone of possible agreement, what I tend to call it, which is the sort of space between as one party in the negotiations, BATNA, my walkaway point, and the other party's BATNA or walkaway point. And that space between those 2 points is your zone of potential agreement or possible agreement. Deployment baseline included the output of definition. So that's a baseline. Again, that's just a starting point that means we have to trace and track against that deployment baseline. And curation included information management, which basically, if you think about what a museum curator does, they look after and organize the information as part of their information management job. The main changes, so things like the project management office, especially the life cycles, is to recognize that things in projects are more flexible than ever, because of things like software and the changing technology being rapid at the moment, is that projects need to, APM like the fact that projects need to have some level of agility, and it's absorbed some of that agility into this syllabus. So scheduling has something included in it now called critical chain, as well as critical path, and the estimation methods have changed their languages slightly. And again, I'm going to go through some of these. Risk management has updated its steps to initiate, identify, analyze, response, and closure. And the other areas, there is more focus on virtual teams. Now, when I started writing a lot of the e-learning I've developed to talk about this, I remember thinking, I don't think many people have experience of virtual teams, but now I think everyone has experience of virtual teams. So there is a question in the exam I have seen about virtual teams. I think almost everyone would have a go at it nowadays. Communications and more flexibility around projects, programs, and portfolios. Cool. So Wilders, Ian, should we pause the questions for the time being, or?
I was just going to say, if anybody has any urgent questions regarding just that overview that you provide, but we are going to go into much more detail about the actual changes. So I think questions that may be coming up, we're probably going to answer in the next bulk of slides anyway. But if anybody has any questions regarding just the overview, I'm quite happy to open them up and answer them for you.
Ian, just Callum's microphone, especially towards the end. I missed a lot of it.
2 seconds there.
A question I have is that with the BOK7, would there be a general assumption that basically BOK6 is delete in the mind? Am I coming across clearly?
Yes, yeah, I can hear it. I think it's a question for Callum to answer, so just let me...
I'm just struggling with my microphone a second. Hang on. I don't know what's going on. I've set it up and it's showing on my side that it's coming through. So I'm not sure if it's a connection, but I have got fairly fast broadband. So I'm not sure what's going on.
I can hear you clearly now. So.
Right. Okay. I'm just changing all the levels and everything. So I missed your question. I'm really sorry. What was your question? Sorry.
That's okay. It's that, you know, with the BOK7 now, is there going to be a general assumption that BOK6 is delete in quote, or is there going to be an assumption that you have an understanding of the transition? As in, yes. Okay.
I don't necessarily think so. I mean, the body of, so for example, one of the questions I have had in the past is if I've got a body of knowledge 6 qualification, is it now redundant? And it's not. It's just a case if you perhaps need to redo some of the content to update yourself. But no, I mean, I'm not quite sure what you're asking, if I'm being honest. If you could clarify what you're asking.
Let me clarify that. In other words, we will be sitting for the BOK7 exams. Would they expect us to know a little bit about BOK6 and how it has transitioned into BOK7?
No, okay. They won't expect you to understand what. Yeah, they don't expect that. They just, as long as you know the body of knowledge 7 syllabus, they don't expect you to know what's changed because it's
Thank you.
It's gone. You know, it's now. This is what we're using now. You won't need to.
Thank you. Spot on.
Okay. What I'll do is I'll try and move on. If you're hearing problems on the microphone, if you could just sort of let me know. I've got it. I'm holding it by my mouth now, so I don't know if that's going to help, but I don't know what's going on. I've got a pretty good microphone. I'm not sure why it would. It may be just something on my computer just not liking it. So I apologise profusely if it's coming through. It's not coming through. But I am going to go through those. That was just an overview. I am going to go through some of those in a bit more detail now. So hopefully, at least if you missed that last bit, I am going to cover it again now anyway, just in a bit more detail. So if there is problems with the microphone, if you just let me know. Okay. Right. So extract from PMQ Body of Knowledge 7 course. Now, we're going to look at the new or amended course content. I'm not going to go into loads of depth. I'm just going to very much blitz through it. And this is mostly using diagrams from the 5-day PMQ training course. Okay. And as I said, if there's problems with my microphone or if you have a question straight away, please let me know, okay? And I can answer it then. But there will be time at the end to answer further questions, okay? The most common PMQ course is going to be over the 5-day back-to-back. So Monday you start, the 5th day you sit the exam. But there's other options as well via blended learning, e-learning, and things like that. Okay? So just be aware that this is not the only way. The 5-day course is not the only way of learning stuff. I think Ian's speaking about. So, project context analysis tool. So this is SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's something that has existed for a long time. Then we have PESTLE, political, economic, sociological, technological, or technical, legal, and ecological, which could be known as environmental if you wanted to. Up to I tend to use ecological myself. So those two have been in the project world for a long time, and in business you see them in all sorts of places, those two. And they're just ways of looking at what risks we face. So strengths and weaknesses, what strengths and weaknesses do we have in the organization? Opportunities and threats are what sits outside an organization. PESTLE is what political risks, stakeholders, complexities do we understand? Economic risks, stakeholders, social risks, stakeholders, etc. Now the new one is VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I think this one is something, as I said, that can really be thought about now. It could be related to a lot with this pandemic. The world we're in is extremely volatile in the United Kingdom at the moment, given the fact that things are changing constantly. It's a very volatile environment we're in. There's a lot of uncertainty. I know that some organizations have cancelled all face-to-face courses for the next year to try and manage that uncertainty, that level of uncertainty, because they don't know whether they're going to get back to face-to-face at all. Then we have complexity. This is a very complicated environment we're in. There's very complicated decisions being made about how we approach this, balancing economy with health and safety and lives and things like that. And ambiguity, when is this going to end? So there's a lot of this. VUCA could be applied to how this pandemic is being managed by the government and scientists and things like that, and they will be looking at this kind of thing in their approach to dealing with this pandemic. So it's kind of quite appropriate, that one, for what we're looking at in the world at the moment. But it can be used to, it's another angle that helps us look at the unstable nature of our projects, because all projects are a risk. To run a project is to take a risk. So we have to acknowledge that there's some uncertainty, volatility, complexity, and ambiguity in that risk we're taking to run this project. Okay, self-explanatory really. Legal, regulations, impact on us as workers and on the working conditions we're in. Governance is the rules and regulations an organization imposes on itself, so they'll be employing a lot of this stuff. And also, is this a sustainable business practice? Is this a sustainable approach to our projects? So this is the linear life cycle then. This is very similar to the one that existed in the Body of Knowledge 6. So you have concept, definition, which are exactly the same, they have not changed. Then we have deployment, which has changed from development to deployment. Then we have transition, which was called handover and close. It's now become transition, which summarizes those two a bit neater. That is the project life cycle. Then we have something called adoption, which is a new phase. Benefits realization, adoption takes place during a benefits realization. The end of adoption is what we would call our extended project lifecycle. Adoption is that period of time where a customer now has their product. So transition, the end of transition, you give this product, the output of your project, to the customer, the user, who then start using it. Adoption is the user has to understand and facilitate and begin using the product in a real world. It's been tested and everything, but tests and trials only yield so much information. When you start actually using the thing in the real world, things change you didn't anticipate. So we have an extended project lifecycle, which allows a project team to scope and prepare to support, to remain on during the adoption phase of this lifecycle, the extended project lifecycle. The project teams hang around a bit longer, whereas in a typical project lifecycle, the project team would disperse. Extended means the project team hangs around a bit longer to sort of oversee any glitches or problems or additional training needs or support that the user needs whilst they're getting used to this new product. This benefits realization phase is about having the measurable benefits of this product. We now have a product. Is it giving us the increased profit, the increased efficiency? Is it increasing? Is it giving us the good things we expected to get from having this product, which we will have outlined right at the start of this whole phase, right at the start of this whole life cycle? Then we have operations. Operations is the lifetime of the usable lifetime of a product. So it's when the customer has the product, they are now using it, and it's the lifetime of that using period. Then we have termination at the end. This operations and termination are part of something called the product life cycle. A product life cycle is the lifetime of a product from concept right through to getting rid of it. Now, the reason we have termination is because we need to acknowledge that there's resources needed to get rid of most of our products. There's costs associated with disposing of our products. So we have a termination phase that allows us to prepare for that and scope for that as early as our concept phase in some instances. I mean, as I said, I used to work for the MOD. We're always thinking about how we're going to get rid of our nuclear submarines before we even start building them. We're also thinking about how we're going to get rid of them at the end. So that's the linear life cycle. Okay, it used to be called just a life cycle. It's now called the linear life cycle. Still has gate reviews on it, which are the go, no go decision points. Stage reviews, which breaks down our deployment phase into more manageable chunks. Post-project review that looks at have we achieved what we set out to achieve. Benefits reviews, have we got the benefits we expected to see during the benefits realization and operations phases. So at the end of our project lifecycle, we have the output, which is a product or service. Outcome is that measurable outcome, that measurable benefit, okay, as a result of having our product. Iterative life cycle is one of the new ones. So iterative life cycles are cyclical. Now, I think this diagram can be a little bit, can be perceived as a little overcomplicated, but effectively what it's saying is...
Sorry, it's Alex again. Maybe I'm the only one, but I can hardly hear you at all at the moment. If anybody else has problems, pipe up. If not, I'll shut up.
Is anyone else having problems with hearing me at all?
No,
Yes.
I can hear you.
Yeah, I've not no problems hearing you. No, I
It was dropping in and out a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. I think I can hear you better than before.
Right. I am not sure then, because I said my computer's telling me my microphone's coming through at full level, so I don't know. It might be a connection issue. It might be bandwidth, possibly, with the number of people on here. I really don't know. And this is a major going on with talking about communication. A barrier to communication would be technology. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't really think I have much control over it at this point now. I've turned up the microphone. I've changed the microphone. I've got it hanging right by my mouth. I'm not sure I really have much control over it anymore. So I can only apologise if it's distorting and everything. So iterative life cycle is a cyclical life cycle. It's, say, we start off with a vision or an idea. So yeah, that's your pre-project element. Then we start planning it, and when we planned it, we then start implementing the plan and testing it, and that then goes back to planning it again. So we have a vision, we then plan for how we're going to achieve the vision, we then implement the plan, and we test it. But rather than just getting nothing out of that, as a result of implementing our plan, we also have an output. We have some kind of product at the end of this. So each time we go through this cycle, we have a product. The way I think of this, if you think about your mobile phones, mobile phone software is constantly being updated. Okay, it's always changing. It's because it's part of an iterative process. It's saying, right, we've developed it, but we've developed it, we need to release something, so here's something out, for you to use. However, once it's been released, they are continuing to develop it. They're continuing to add and change it and tweak it. So in a few months' time, another one rolls out to your phone, and it keeps being iterated. So iterative life cycles were mainly developed for software. They were mainly developed to recognize that software needs to be reactive, a bit more agile, and that it needs to be updated beyond just a deadline. Deadlines can be a bit of a problem sometimes with life cycles. There's a video game I could think of that had real problems with this deadline and then this iterative approach. So a linear life cycle reflects on quality, time, and cost, quality being at the peak of the triangle, saying we need to make sure we deliver all three of these things. An iterative life cycle is time, box, cost, scope, and quality. So the way I think of it is this. An iterative life cycle says, we have this much money and this much time. What can we get for this much money and this much time? And then they just see. And they go, okay, we haven't got what we wanted. How much more money and how much more time do we need? And that's your time box element. Again, I'm not going to go into lots of detail here, but that's effectively what it is. Linear is you program it, it's very rigid. You work out at the start how much money you want to spend across the project, what exactly it is you want by the end of the project. Iterative starts off with a more vague idea. We want something, we're not entirely sure what we want yet. We have this much money and this much time. Let's see what we can get for it. And that's generally what's driving an iterative life cycle over a linear life cycle. Then we can blend the two together in a hybrid life cycle. Hybrid takes both approaches. So what you tend to see is a more rigid backbone. So you have your concept, definition, deployment, and transition. But you'll often see the iterative life cycle being used in definition to help us plan our project, to have a more agile, more flexible approach to planning, which allows us to deliver outputs for our plans without having to spend tons and tons of money, but also be reactive to risks. In our deployment phase, we can employ these things called tranches rather than stages. A stage happens consecutively, one after the other. A tranche can have some parallels with another tranche. It can overlap and allow some lessons to be learned whilst also running the second tranche. So it blends the two together, melds the two. And I'm seeing more and more of that in the Ministry of Defence, for example. I'm seeing them being more agile with some parts of it, but then they need that rigid backbone to control budgets and things like that. The transition phase then is effectively about handing over to the customer and closing out the project, hence why it used to be called handing over and closing out the project. So it's about making sure the customer is happy with what they got, so they'll need to inspect, they'll need to trial it, they'll need to make sure that the scope has been delivered, they'll have to have documentation to prove that it's happened. Once they have all this documentation, once they have tested it and trialed it and inspected, they will accept it. When we hand over to our customer, we then need to make sure they're fully trained in it. Then the customer, once they're happy with it, once they've accepted it, once they've been trained, will then start using it. And that's when you're transitioning into the operations phase, which is where the customer, it's the business as usual. The customer's then using that product. So project management team organization. This hasn't changed a huge amount. So here's a rough idea of what a project roles and responsibilities would look like. You have your management board, so that's your program or portfolio level. Project sponsor, it's the direct funding and the chief primary risk taker. Then you have the project manager who's managing the project, self-explanatory. Underneath them, you have your team managers and project team. Then onto the side of that, you have your project management office and admin support. Now, this is the one that's been changed slightly. So you have an embedded, central, or hub and spoke project management office. Embedded PMO is for a large project. It's for a project that's big enough to warrant having this admin support as part of the project team. So this project team has a direct contact with their admin, direct contact with the project management office. A central one is able to support as a central part of the organization that supports lots of projects. So if you have lots of small projects, then you have a centralized area that enables consistency of approach, a centralized place for training, record keeping, databases, configuration libraries, center of excellence for things like HR support, stuff like that. And it's a centralized area to allow consistency between projects. Hub and spoke blends those two together. So you'll have people from a central PMO being deployed into projects to help support them directly. So hence hub being the central area, then you have spokes which are all going out to these different projects to support them and embed into them directly. You still have that centralized hub area. Assurance and audits, so they will be done on behalf of the project sponsor and the project board, who are the ones who are deciding the strategic direction of projects and making sure that the project manager and the project team are adhering to processes and governance that have been laid out by the organization. Users are the customers. You could get customers, users, they're the ones who put the final product into service. Then you have product owners. So as I mentioned, each time you go through an iteration, you end up with a product, and that product needs to have a product owner who oversees it. Okay, so it can't just be some random person. It has to be a designated role that owns the product that's been received at the end of an iterative cycle. And then we have the hierarchy there. So management board sits above the project sponsor chairs the project board, project manager reports to the sponsor, team manager report to the project manager. So estimating methods is another one that has changed fairly significantly. Still the same things, it's just they've changed the terminology. So we have top-down methods, the first of which is a parametric method. So I'll use a quick example here. My friend's a dry stick waller. A friend of mine is a dry stick waller. And if he gets, someone says to him, I need 10 meters of wall done, he can say to them, it's going to take me 2 days and cost £1,000, because he knows he can do about 5 meters in a day, and each meter costs £100 for him to do, including materials. And he's done that because he's got a database of evidence proving allowing him to establish how much his time is worth, how much materials cost, how much he can do in a day. He then uses this database and generates an estimate using a formula from the data, evidence, experiences established in his database. So it uses databases to then extract a quote. So if you've ever had building work done for you, builders come in and measured around your house and said, oh, big job, this is going to cost £1,000. They've done a parametric estimate, okay? Analogous, so it could be called comparative estimating. So this is where you compare with a similar historical project to determine how much you think it's going to cost and how long it's going to take. So if you think, oh, I've done the upstairs bedroom and I want to do the living room as well. The upstairs bedroom took me 10 days and the living room is a bit smaller and is a slightly easier shape, therefore I reckon 8 days. So you're comparing it to a previous project that's similar enough to be relevant. If you're comparing it to the mansion's ballroom 25 miles away, it's probably not going to give particularly accurate estimates. So you're comparing it, analogous is comparing it to a similar historical project that's relevant to your project. So the bottom up methods then, analytical. So this is where you break your project down into detail. So you do a detailed estimate for labor and non-labor resources. Typically a work breakdown structure is helping with that. So you break your project down into all the tasks you need to achieve for your project, and then you establish estimates for each single work package. It takes a long time, requires a lot of information to be able to do that, but it's typically the most accurate estimate because it's your estimates. You have established all this, you've worked it all out yourself. You are able to then go, okay, if this takes this long, then this takes this long, then this takes this long. But you can't really do that at the start of a project. It takes time to be able to develop an analytical estimate. The last one then, Delphi, is the generation of a cost through team consensus. You tend to bring in a group of experts who will then be split into smaller groups usually, who will then discuss in their small groups, arrive at a consensus, then come back into their bigger group, then they'll arrive at a consensus. Obviously, being a group of experts, it needs to be managed and have an agenda and have someone chairing it, but it allows a generation of a cost through a group of people using their experiences to arrive at a consensus and agreed cost. Okay. Delphi is the new one that's been added to estimating. The others have been changed some of the terminology and given them a different category, but effectively they're all the same. Delphi is a new one. Then we have critical path analysis. I won't go through the methodology here, but the top middle tells us the duration of each task. The bottom middle in red is the critical path. So where a path has a 0 in the bottom middle one, which is called total float, 0 total float, it tells me any of those tasks are late, my project will be late. Activity B there has 1 in the middle, which means if activity B is 1 day late, I could still deliver this project within 13 days. 13 days. So that's 13 on the top right of activity E is how long this project is going to last. This is exactly the same. This is not changed between Body of Knowledge 6 and Body of Knowledge 7. Okay, so if you have studied a critical path stuff, it's exactly the same. Nothing's changed. The only difference is they will not ask you to complete a critical path analysis as part of your exam. Body of Knowledge 6, they could ask you to do one, but they won't be for Body of Knowledge 7. So we have something called critical chain now. And the purpose of critical chain is exactly the same, except the emphasis is on the resources rather than the activity. And rather than having the float, so that wiggle room, that delay time on a task within the activity, so we could delay this task by 1 day, it acts as a buffer. So if you have, 5 days total float, you don't stick it as part of the activity, you stick it on the end as a sort of a dummy task sometimes. So we've got 5 days wiggle room at the end of all these sequence of tasks. So it's the same kind of thing. It's just looking at how much flex have we got, but it's looking at it from a resource point of view rather than a task point of view. That is a new one, and that's something I would expand upon if we were going into in the full course. It's all about understanding how much flex do we have before we start interfering with the end dates and things like that. Then we have this thing called earned value management. Again, this is an enormous topic. You can spend a day, if not longer, going through just the basics of earned value management. It's a complicated topic. So I'll go through some of these acronyms very quickly, and then we'll talk about, I'll just give you a very quick example of how this might work. So we have a red line there, which has PC, PV, and BCWS next to it, okay? So they're all just different terms for the same thing. So PC stands for planned cost, PV stands for planned value, BCWS stands for budgeted cost of work scheduled. So PC, planned cost, PV, planned value, BCWS, budgeted cost of work scheduled. That tells us what do we plan to spend throughout this project. So in this project, we plan to spend £10,000 with £1,000 increments each project day. Then we have the blue dotted line, which is AC or ACWP, and that is the actual cost. So this is the actual cost of works, how much we've actually spent on the project. ACWP is actual cost of work performed. Okay, so this tells me that at the end of the 6th day, we've spent £5,000. We'd actually planned to spend £6,000. So this tells me we are under budget. We are coming in under budget here, because this blue line, if things were as we planned them to be, this blue dotted line would be mirroring it, be exactly aligned with the red line, because our planned cost would meet our actual cost, but we've actually spent less than we planned to spend at this point in time. Now the black dotted line is earned value, or budgeted cost of work performed, which is your BCWP, budgeted cost of work performed. Now, earned value is how much of value have we earned of our product. So in this instance, say we've earned £7,000 worth of our product when we plan to only have earned £6,000 worth of product. So we're actually ahead of schedule. We've earned more product than we planned to have at this point. We've also paid less for it. So this project is under budget and ahead of schedule. Is that, so there's a lot you can go into on this. Does that kind of make sense a little bit there? Cool. Okay. Again, we go into a lot more detail on this in the full thing. Sorry, someone's got some noise going on a microphone there. Cool, it's gone. Thank you. So we've got a few different examples here. So the red line is our budget, our planned cost. Our actuals are our green line, and we have a blue line for our earned value. So project A, looking at this, our green line is above our red line, and our blue line is above our green line and our red line. So what this tells me is this project is over budget. So this project here, we planned to spend £6,000 at day 6, and we've actually spent £7,000. However, we have earned £8,000 worth of product. So we're ahead of schedule, and we're under budget for what we've actually received. So we've got more product and we've paid less for it than we've actually received. Again, something we'd go more into detail on in the full thing. Then we have project B. This is a bit like the first one. So we have a planned budget. Our actual cost is below our planned budget. So we've spent less than we planned. We've received a lot more value, than we plan to have at this point in time. So we've got £8,000 worth of value, but we've only planned to have £6,000 worth of product at this point in time. The last one, so we have our planned cost of in the red. The green line is showing above that. So we've spent £8,000. We've actually spent £8,000, and we have planned to spend £6,000. So we've actually spent £2,000 more than we planned to spend at this point in time. However, this time our earned value is below our red line, which means I've received, £4,000 worth of product when I planned to have £6,000 worth of product. So this project is very behind schedule and very over budget. And that's what earned value is helping us to do. It's tracking progress through our project, and then this will enable us to make a decision, because we are knowing this at day 6 rather than at day 10 when things are too late to deal with. We now know this a few days in advance that things aren't going as expected. How do we change and manage the situation? So that's the purpose of earned value management. Change control process then. So this is a similar process as we had before. It's just acknowledging that change needs to be managed on projects. We can't just change stuff. We have to go through a formal process. So log our change request, record all our changes, and make sure they're justified. Initial evaluation, is it worth proceeding and considering? Is it just a waste of time even going any further than this? It's like a sort of initial overview. Then it gets sent for a detailed evaluation, and this is where you start considering how much what's the impact on cost, success criteria, the benefits, the scope, the quality, etc., stakeholders. If we don't do this, what's the impact on all this if we do it? So it's that detailed evaluation. Is it worth us doing from a financial point of view, engagement point of view, risk point of view, resource point of view, etc.? Then a recommendation is made. So the sponsor is there's a recommendation made to the sponsor or the wider governance board to look at, approve, and they can accept it, reject it, or defer the change. The sponsor is then accountable for ensuring a decision is made and communicated. Okay, so reject and accept, fairly self-explanatory. Defer means they put it off until there's further information. So it might be the end of financial year, or until after a general election, or after Brexit, or something like that. They defer the decision until they have further information about the scenario, the environment, the project changes can be taking place. If the change is approved, we update our plans, we reflect the changes in our baseline, our plan to update our baseline. If we don't do that, we'll be working from old information. We need to make sure our plans are current and up to date to reflect any changes and the updates we've had to our project processes and plans. Okay. And information is communicated in line with the comms plan. Any of this needs to be updated. It can't be just done. It has to be the stakeholders have to be made aware that we've made these changes. We can't just change them and then just, oh, we go, off we go. The people involved with the project, the stakeholders, have to be made aware that we've made a change. Otherwise, they won't react to it. They won't know about it. They won't be able to respond or enact it. Okay. So this is the negotiation thing. BATNA and ZOPA. It's a really nice diagram just showing what I was talking about earlier on. Best alternative negotiated agreement is your walkaway points. So we have our walkaway point for us, and we have our walkaway point for them. And that zone of potential agreement is right in the middle there. So where the two BATNAs meet, or where they end effectively, that's where our zone of agreement is going to be. Hopefully, that's where we want our negotiation. Both parties want our negotiation outcome to fall in that zone of possible agreement, or best agreement, or whatever you want. Risk management process. This is the other thing that's changed. Not changed much so. Initiate is to define the objectives and the scope, the roles and responsibilities, the tolerances for risk, the appetites for risk, what tools we're going to use, what systems we're going to follow, all this kind of stuff. Then we have to identify any risks. So what threats do we face? What opportunities do we face? We could do brainstorms to do that. We could look at previous projects, speak to specialists, all this kind of stuff. Use PESTLE, SWOT to help us identify risks. Then we have to analyze these risks to qualitatively and I can't speak now. Quantify them and to give them a qualitative measurement. So we want to be able to measure the risk. We need to understand what's the impact and the probability. We need to give them a risk score, to give them a number, a value of some kind, which allows us to prioritize which risks we approach first. Then we can respond to risk, and there's multiple responses, and we need to make sure we're not just ignoring our opportunities. We need to make sure we're responding to our opportunities as much or with as much skill as we're responding to our threats. We often miss opportunities as a result of getting very hung up on the threats. Closure is then the risk is finished, the risk has happened, or the risk has gone by, or we've dealt with it and it's no longer a problem. We close off that risk, make sure it's now stopped. We don't need to do any further action against the risk. So here we have our appetite, attitude towards risk in the initiate step. Identification, understanding uncertainties with potential impact. We could do workshops, lessons learned, risk owners, stakeholders. Cause, event, and effect is extremely important. The cause being the why. If we don't know why the risk could happen, then we're never going to be dealing with the actual problem. We're going to be dealing with the symptom, not the cause. We always should be looking for the cause of a risk. This is where we assess it. Probability, impact, and proximity. So probability is how likely the risk is to happen. Impact is what's the impact to our objectives if it does happen. And proximity is how close is that risk to happening. So how close are we to that risk event? Quantitative, using Monte Carlo simulation. Okay, so Monte Carlo is where you plug some estimates into a database, and it will then pull out, it runs your project 1,000 times based on those estimates and gives you a best estimate. So it helps you to quantify your risks using this system. Responses. So we have a couple of different ones. We have proactive responses. So we could avoid, reduce, or transfer, which is usually insurance in projects, or accept a threat. Or we could proactively exploit, enhance, share, or reject an opportunity. Exploit is to maximize the opportunity. Enhance is to encourage it to happen. Share is bring a third party on. Reject is to take no further action. Reactive is only implemented if the risk materializes. So if the risk happens, then we often do things like fallback plans and stuff like that. We have a backup plan just in case the risk happens. So the closure is when they have occurred and there's no possibility of it occurring or reoccurring, or at the end of business as usual for ongoing management. So when you hand over to your transition, you go into business as usual. It's no longer your risk as a project team. It's closed. You don't need to manage it anymore. It's someone else's ongoing concern, if there is still a risk, but it shouldn't be, hopefully. Okay. This is very important. Often one that I see getting forgotten is that we, especially in my experiences, you'll often find people identify risk and manage risk at the start of a project, and then they never go back and look at it again. They set it up, they go, these are all the risks we have, and then they go, right, we need to manage these. Once they're gone, they're gone. Things change. The world of project management is constantly shifting with legislation and environments changing, social attitudes changing, all things that happen and can affect the project success. Therefore, and same with stakeholders, actually, we should be doing this regularly. Every time we have a review, we should look at, have the risks changed? When we do our reports, have the risks changed? So we need to constantly be looking at, have we identified them? Are there new risks? Have we analyzed the risks correctly? Now we've responded to them, has that moved them? Has that changed their impact and probability? Do we need to remeasure them? So we have to do this throughout our project. Risk doesn't just go away, it's constant. We have to be measuring it throughout and keeping an eye on it throughout our project, right up until we hand it over to the customer. So that does bring me to the end of the topics. Again, there's loads more detail we can go into, but I'm just very conscious of time. So are there any questions for myself or Ian regarding what we've talked about there?
Well, Callum, I was expecting a couple of questions, but obviously you've covered everything in great detail.
Will we be getting these slides?
What we'll do is we'll send a recording of these of the webinar out to you following the completion of it, so you'll have this to refer back to.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Hopefully it was useful for everyone.
Oh, most certainly.
Good.
It has.
I agree. Cool. I mean, there's a few things I think Ian wants to go through quickly. If you want to go through this, Ian, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you, Callum. Appreciate your time this morning. It was very, very informative. And if anybody does have any further questions regarding the exam or regarding the new BOK7 materials, there's some contact details on the slide in front of you today, now. So we've got the telephone number for the office, or if you want to just email them into learning@trainingbitesize.com, you can, and we'll get answers to you for whatever questions you have. So just before we wrap up today, just want to make you aware of a couple of the sort of offers that we're currently running in January. So we've got that on the screen ahead of you to now. I think the main one you'll be interested in is the 599 plus VAT on the APM PMQ course. So if you are looking to do it online, we are offering that, and just get in contact with us and we can provide a bit more information regarding it, or just go onto the website and it's all there for you as well. We're also offering the foundation online learning across our portfolio of courses for 249 plus VAT, and the Prince 2 Foundation and Practitioner course as well. So that's there at 599 plus VAT. I think the one thing just coming to, as we've just touched over the Prince 2, we may have just oversized a little bit with the exams. If you are a Prince 2 practitioner, you can actually sit a reduced or a 2-hour PMQ exam rather than doing the 3-hour one. So you will have 10 questions to choose from, and you will only need to answer 6 of them. So it's just something to be aware of if you do already hold that Prince 2 practitioner qualification. So finally, I'll just like to say thank you for joining us for today. Delighted to see such a sort of a positive turnout. Really, we've had a lot of people who have joined us, and it's I'm delighted to see that you could have joined us today. Appreciate you taking the time out of your obviously busy schedules. I hope it's all been useful for you, and I look forward to speaking to you all soon. So take care, everybody, and so bye for now.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Guys.
Callum. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye then.